Listeners, welcome to today's episode. It's going to be talking about your relationship with money and specifically the three common mindsets: scarcity, spend it or blow it as soon as you get it, and we don't talk about money. And we'll be talking about the impacts and what to do about it in today's episode. So I hope you enjoy.
Hey there, this is Tales of Abundance. I'm Dr. John Oberg, and with me as always, Randy Lorensen, and then we've got off to my left, Anthony Marino. Today we're going to talk about money and people's relationship with money. We've talked about this a lot, the three of us, and I think in one of our previous episodes we talked about gross domestic product versus gross happiness for nations and all that good stuff. But today I think we'll jump into the buckets of money that people grow up in. And you've both heard me talk about this when I've, taught classes on most people grow up either with a scarcity mindset where it's you pinch every penny when it comes in, and other people, they spend it as fast as they can get it because they never know what's coming again. And then families like mine, I grew up where, we didn't talk about money. And those have, different implications for people as you grow up, and then it creates different relationships with money. And so, Randy, fun to kind of start with you. What bucket did you grow up in?
Definitely the scarcity mindset, right? And we've talked about this before. I have put quite a bit of work into that, but the joke that I think I've used on this podcast before, so I apologize for those that have listened, is my dad threw around nickels like they were manhole covers.
He used to shear the buffalo on the nickel before he'd spend it so he could actually use it. Yeah.
Pretty much, yeah. I mean, it was definitely a scarcity mindset. And look, some of it rightfully so. We didn't have a lot of money. And there wasn't a lot of excess, right? But the answer in general was, that's expensive. We can't afford that.
Yeah, but it should be said that scarcity mindset doesn't mean you don't have a lot of it. I mean, I met a guy who was worth millions who I watched him go to buy a cup of coffee, and he squeezed the dollar bills before he let him go for somebody because he had such a hard time letting that go. And, so the scarcity mindset doesn't mean you don't have a lot of it.
Yeah. That's definitely true. Yeah. But even as I've had more money, as I've grown, that it's taken me years to work on that. And just recently have I started, there were little things like when I was playing poker, and, if you bet thousands of dollars, or especially if you bet thousands of dollars with nothing, and you are starting to deal with bigger sums of money, little pieces of that flaked off. But the core was still there. And I think that it's really transformed a lot in the last even few months.
You ever worry that can cause a tell for you when you were playing?
I don't think so, but I'm sure I had tells I was blissfully unaware of.
Yeah. And so what were some of the belief systems that were, good and bad, that came out of that?
The biggest thing that for me, was I had a belief system that rich people were inherently bad. Mm-hmm. And that if people were rich, that they had stepped on somebody else's neck to get there, or it came at somebody else's expense. And that was not healthy because, A, it's simply not true. And even as I grew and I'd meet rich people that were amazing people, and they were giving and they were doing all these wonderful things, that was ingrained in me in childhood. And the impact of that is I made money, and then I lost it, and I made money, and I lost it, and I had some chances to have a lot more money than I have now. And we're not living paycheck to paycheck necessarily, but I could have, a lot of opportunities slipped away. And in the back of my mind, I'm pretty sure that belief system about scarcity and having money made you a bad person, that I was subconsciously somehow sabotaging myself, mm-hmm. right? And I can't necessarily point to a decision I made that was on it, but I just kind of believe that the universe was against me because I wasn't yet ready to accept abundance in that area.
Do you think there's some good things that came out of it? Like maybe you were better value shopping, or?
Absolutely. There is that, right? And sometimes it was cheap. One lesson I did learn a long time ago is I used to go to the store and you'd look at all the different brands, and I would choose the cheap one. And then I would frickin' regret it because it'd be a piece of crap and I would have to replace it eventually, and then I would buy a little better one. Now, I generally don't want the cheap one. I want the better one that I'm going to enjoy, it's going to last, and in the long run is going to be actually probably cheaper and a better value. But one of the big things it did...
Real quick, when was the turning point for that?
That happened sooner. I mean, that's maybe years ago.
Okay.
I mean, that isn't quite as recent. But I'd say one of the other big things is it gave me a very low time preference. And what that means is a lot of people, I mean, when we get into the spend it, blow it, right, category, it's what can I get now, immediate gratification. I was very, very good at delaying gratification and pushing things into the future and saving and stacking and planning. And that's part of what helped me, build wealth and sometimes accumulate treasure. But because I hadn't done the work to fix that basic scarcity mindset, then I would somehow, and again, maybe it was market forces, right? When I worked for an internet company and we had the .com bust, and all of a sudden millions of dollars disintegrated into thin air. Okay, I didn't control that, but I just kind of believe that mindset put me in that place, and that it was God, it was the universe. I hadn't learned that lesson yet. And ironically, I now have a lot of gratitude for that, because I think there's some journeys and missions, and we don't have to go deep on that now, but some things that I'm working on those hard lessons have made me more capable of telling that story and bringing abundance to the world in a different way now that I maybe wouldn't have been able to do had I not had to learn those lessons the hard way.
One separate related is your ability to find gratitude in things is super cool. We should definitely hit on that, if not today. That's worthy of a conversation for sure. Okay. Anthony, which bucket did you grow up in?
Well, I was blissfully unaware in my early childhood of what became apparent as I kind of got into late middle school or at the time they called it junior high, in high school. We were living in a boom or bust cycle. The family was in the construction business, and as a young child, probably until I was 10 or 11, I didn't know that, one year my father was quote unquote loaded, in the sense of what you could be loaded on in the 60s, or broke, one or the other. It was either or, and it could be over a course of a year or every 6 months. What covered it up, this sham, was he was one of the most respected people in our town, and we were looked at as, the top 1%, because we lived on at the beach. We had this big, beautiful house that actually was given to us by my mother's father on the condition that we take care of my grandmother until she passed, and so on and so forth. But early, like ninth grade or whatever it was, I became literally aware of, we're broke, we're doing good, we're broke, we're doing good. You guys know the story of, my involvement with the gaming industry.
We just call those your entrepreneurial exploits at an early age.
Yeah, entrepreneurial exploits of being a bookie, making money, and coming home and seeing my mother crying on the couch because she couldn't make the payment to get oil delivered to the house and so forth. So, it was boom or bust, and it became a lot of bust, in the 80s and, the late 70s and early 80s and so on. So the impact of that was, I had a false sense of security that I had to eliminate, right? Because I'm living in this world thinking everything's fine. But it instilled tremendous fear in me. And as I moved on with my life and out of the house, the only thing that I focused on was making money. That's it. It caused me to make some horrible decisions.
So your family was in the get it, spend it bucket. Did you land there, or did that send you into the scarcity bucket, or what did that do?
It sent me into not the get it, spend it bucket, but I don't know what you would call it. I wanted, I wanted to, I wanted to earn money consistently, never worry about it, and earn more every year, which caused me to make some decisions in my life that I would probably not make again.
Did you save it or spend it as you got it?
We saved it. I wanted an environment where I had a floor. I always had a floor. But I also didn't want, because the period of the 70s was brutal. I mean, it was I had to pay for college, and it was just a horrible, horrible time. So I wanted a floor, but I also wanted my wife and my kids to have things consistently. I didn't buy them, the most expensive things in the world, but I always wanted them to know that everything was all right. That we never, don't worry, guys, we got this. So we always bought a nice house. We always had nice things, not the best things, not the biggest house in the neighborhood, but nice things. I didn't want them to feel. Never wanted them to see my wife on the couch crying because we couldn't make a house payment. I didn't. That instilled such fear in me. So
did you guys talk about money as a family?
No, not with the kids. And of course we talked about it prior to me getting married and moving on, because, hey, we got no money. What are you going to do? What's Dad doing? Dad doesn't have a job. Dad's not bringing it in. Okay, well, here we go. Everyone pitched in. Everyone worked. Everyone, knew what was wrong and did what they could to, put a lid on it and, tighten the belt, if you will. So,
yeah, I grew up in the we don't talk about money household. Like, I remember one day I walked into the room where Mom and Dad were paying bills, and I saw paperwork that I'd never seen before, and I was quickly ushered out of the room and the door was shut behind me. And it wasn't mean or bad or like scary. It was just like, this, you're just not a part of this conversation. And then when I finally was going to learn about money, it was my mom taking me to the bank, helping me open my first checking account for $25. I had a check register and a checkbook at that point, and then she helped me enroll in a class at our high school that taught me how to balance the checkbook, but she wasn't going to teach me that. That was going to be somebody else who taught me that. And it wasn't really talked about at all. So I didn't learn about, budgeting or, paying bills or what bills to worry about, or there just wasn't a conversation that I had. And I don't think it was like, like deliberate on their part to hold something back. I just think that's the world they grew up in, and that was the world that they thought was right for the kids. And maybe they thought they were protecting me from something, but it sure made it tough when I, wasn't forced to balance a checkbook until after college. Like, that was a rude awakening.
Yeah, we only talked about it in times of crisis, like the day I came home and there was a foreclosure notice on the front door. Okay, time to talk about it. What are we going to do? And we're going to go to see this uncle, or we're going to try to do a reverse mortgage. I think we were probably the first people in America that did a reverse mortgage. I'm not kidding. It was like at the very beginning of that. So, it instilled a lot of, as I said, fear, angst, worry, that type of stuff. It's not healthy at all, and it's not good for decision making.
Yeah. What do you like? So, in terms, like, I've studied this a lot to understand the impact of what this does to someone's career, both from how does it impact me, and then also how does it impact others, because I coach this stuff. But have you given much thought to like how your relationship with money has impacted your career or your family?
I don't know that I have as much as my family more than career. Mm-hmm. Have you, Anthony? I haven't really thought about it in a career standpoint.
Well, it affected my career from the standpoint of if I thought an opportunity was going to allow me to make more money, I would seriously consider it and make the move, irrespective of the collateral damage. We've spoken about this before, that it has on the people around me. I mean, my wife and I bought our first house in Georgia in 1980, October of 1980, and in February of 81, was it 81? No, it was 82 to 83. less than 6 months after buying that house at 16% interest and using
I'm sorry, how much?
16% interest
Oh,
and using the credit card to put the last $2,000 down to pay for it. The following February, I met her on the front steps of that house, our little house in Georgia, and said, "Hey, I got promoted. We're going to Cincinnati." I mean, Jesus Christ. I mean, what a dumbass, right? So, yeah, it's, yeah.
Yeah.
Jan's a saint.
Yeah.
Stop saying nice things about Jan. She's not going to appreciate this.
Sorry, Jan.
All right. Anthony's answer gave me a second to think about this. And interestingly, that scarcity mindset hasn't reared its head in business for me very much. I have always been willing to spend money to make money and to try and leverage it and use money in business. So somehow, while it affected me in my day-to-day spending and lifestyle, not nearly as much in business. Now, there's probably times where I could have bought a better computer, a better desk, or a better something and saved time and energy, or paid somebody to do things that I could, I think there are times where I definitely did things myself that I would have been much better off giving to somebody else. But as for running a business, investing in advertising, those types of things, even in my poker world, right? It was spending the money and getting comfortable with it. However, I do think there's times where I didn't take a leap or didn't pursue something or think about something because I had to pay the bills and getting tied into something. And I think at times I maybe have pursued the wrong opportunity because of that scarcity mindset.
Yeah, someone challenged me at one point, a professional mentor, to go ask somebody a whole bunch of questions about money. And I went and asked 5 different people, and one of them was my financial advisor, and one was a friend. And the scariest one was my, at the time, my father-in-law, ex-father-in-law now. And he was the scariest person because he had a lot of money, and I wasn't comfortable talking about it at all. But I had these 5 questions I was going to ask each of them. And what it showed me is that I didn't have to be scared having a conversation if they were reasonable questions, reasonable conversation. And that helped me a lot to get comfortable having conversations about a topic that can be uncomfortable for lots of people.
I think that's a great strategy, right? If there's something we're uncomfortable with, you lean in and you
face the fear.
You face it, yeah.
Not in an unsafe or unhealthy way. I'm not telling you to jump out of a plane without a parachute. That's not,
This topic also makes me think, kids go to school for all these years, college, and they don't teach anything about money. Right? You talked about balancing a checkbook. I mean, I'm a big believer. This should be.
I've got a great story about this.
But yeah, like people don't understand that. They don't understand paying taxes. I remember, Anthony, you maybe saw this, but there was a 30 for 30 called Broke.
Yeah.
You saw that? There was a
TV show on ESPN.
Yeah. So there's lots of things in there, but the thing I'm thinking about here, Andre Rison was a wide receiver for the Falcons. It's years since I've seen this, but as I recall, he went to the Falcons. He signed this big contract where he was supposed to make like $1 million a game. He was very excited, got his first paycheck, was walking out of the building, opened the envelope, and it wasn't $1 million. It was $600 or $650 or whatever it was after taxes. And he goes, "Oh, they made a mistake on my check." And he went back into the offices and told the people, "Hey, you guys made a mistake." And they're like, "No, that's taxes." And he's like, "Well, what the hell's FICA? And what the hell?" And he just literally had no idea. So he had grown up, if I remember right, might have been like inner city LA or someplace like that. And school never taught him. He didn't grow up around people that had that knowledge. He didn't learn it in college after, I think, 4 years of college, and literally had no idea that you had to pay taxes out of your check. I mean, that seems criminal to me, that people get out into society and they have no idea about that.
Seems like a real failure of the education system. There's did you guys ever read that book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad?
A long time ago.
Yeah.
He has a game called Cash Flow. And this game, Cash Flow, teaches about money management, and it teaches about all these cool things. And it has like a paper spreadsheet essentially that teaches you about how to manage your cash. And my daughter is now a young adult. We were going through managing her personal expenses, and she said, "Dad, can you help me make an online spreadsheet that does it like the game cash flow?" Because we played so often with her as a kid that she understood how that game related to real work, and we put together a personal budget for her using the same outline of the game cash flow. It was amazing.
Yeah.
It was cool. Like I felt vindicated for actually inadvertently teaching my daughter how to manage cash flow.
One of the things that that affected me in the way I behaved was after I'm on my own and moving forward and things are going well and so on and so forth, I never really was satisfied. The high, I would say the highs were actually a medium high in my mind, right? That, okay, I'm here. This is good, but I want to be here. I was measuring myself on the bank account, on the paycheck, along with things like, the position and, where I was in the organizational chart. So I never really enjoyed it. It wasn't until way later in life that I started to enjoy the comfort, being comfortable. And I'm sad about that. I really am. I'm sad about the effect it had on people around me. And it's kind of like I never compliment or you never compliment someone enough, right? You're quick to criticize. Same kind of feeling that I was self-critical for no good reason, This whole episode discussion has made me really go back and reflect. I might be in therapy by Friday to get through that. I might have to break that down a little bit.
Like, what do you think? I mean, not that you have the therapy here on the air, but like it's having you to reflect. Like,
let's have their therapy on the air.
Yeah, why not?
Yeah. So I mean, but if you're reflecting on that, like what if you could change something going forward, what would be the thing you wish to change?
Well, first thing I want to get through it and forgive myself for the behavior.
Sure.
Right? It's no more self-flagellation over it. So on and so forth. But going forward, I've come out the other side of that. I came out the other side long before we sold the company and made a lot of money and all that. But reflecting back on it, it was what a waste. What a waste of emotional opportunity to really relish the successes and where you are.
Yeah, Anthony's thing makes me think about adding to what we originally talked about, scarcity, right? There's opportunities and trips and things to spend money on that would have been a really good use of money. And we'll talk more about that next episode. But I missed out on because I was too much of a scarcity mindset and a saving mindset, right? And then there's times that I even spent the money and I went and did it, but in the back of my mind, I was questioning, instead of just going and being free and living in the moment, I was thinking, should I have spent the money on this? Or this is a waste of money, or I could have invested this money instead of spending it here.
Yeah.
Right? And I definitely overcorrected to saving and not living in the moment enough. This is one of the things, by the way, I have a couple of friends that I can think of that are in the spend it as fast as I get it.
Yeah.
And there's a part of me that looks at that and goes, oh my God, they could have so much more if they would just invest. And there's another part of me that's really envious.
Yeah.
Because those crazy bastards go out and they just frickin' enjoy it, right? And then they may not know how they're going to pay rent next month, or they may not be able to leverage it and invest it and do the things, use money as a tool, but they do tend to really live in the moment and enjoy life. Yeah. And that's not so bad either.
I think there's a real balance. I was taking some notes here as we're talking, and I think, this will be one of our shorter episodes, but, the thing that I'm really sensitive to is that there's so much data around us now that really understanding our relationship with money is going to be important for us as we have places like Amazon who use dynamic pricing to figure out how to have the maximum extraction from us. There's just an article in, I can't remember which national newspaper, where like museums and zoos are now considering having like, burst pricing for like high traffic times. You're going to pay more for the tickets, and low traffic times you're going to pay less. And well, it makes a lot of sense because they want to even out their traffic. There's like hey, if you'll pay more, we'll sell it for more type of thing. Like, airline tickets are like that already. I worry about how things come up on Amazon for me. Like, am I paying more than somebody else for the same thing?
Yeah.
So I think us understanding what our relationship with money is and the impact it has on our other relationships, personally and professionally, is probably an important thing to be aware of.
Let's take a break, and we'll come back and talk about that when we get back.
Okay.
Listeners, welcome back. Tales of Abundance. Still here with John and Anthony, and we're talking about money and our relationship with it. Before break, we were talking...
Not romantic, by the way. Just a regular old relationship with money.
Okay, no dad jokes.
Oh, I was talking about the love of money, actually. I was being tongue-in-cheek, a little double entendre.
Okay.
I'm with Anthony on this dad joke.
I can turn it into a dad joke.
Let's move on.
All right, moving on. So, dynamic pricing. We were talking about that a little bit before the break, John, and coming back. You want to dig back into that?
I just think there's some watch-outs, right? I think, the relationship we have with money is going to impact us in different ways. This is one of the newer ways that I'm paying attention to, only because I read a news article, and I'm sensitive to, like, if you're buying airline tickets, we know there's dynamic pricing. If you use Uber, there's surge pricing. But now we're seeing it in like museums and zoos, and perhaps online buying platforms that watch your entire behavior history. And so I just think people need to know, like, if their relationship with money is healthy, I think it's going to be easier to identify places where they can protect themselves should they desire to. And if there's an unhealthy relationship with money, I think it's just easier to be manipulated by a situation. That's all.
Okay. In the beginning, we talked about scarcity, spend it all. We don't talk about it. I don't know, and we're going to go into good ways to use money as a tool in the next episode after this. But let's talk a little bit about the optimal, and realizing that's not going to be the same for everybody,
sure,
right? And I think we all have some combination of the three. But what is optimal? What do you guys think is optimal?
Anthony, what do you think? What's the optimal relationship with money based on your experience?
So I think if there was a way to treat this like a recipe and have a little bit of everything in it, in the way we talk about money, to have some just enough honesty to not frighten the family, if you will. I think that I wish I had thought about this before I had kids or as I was having kids, because I have grown into we don't talk about it. So that I don't think that's necessarily healthy. So they should be there should be some consciousness that scarcity is actually a good thing. Thinking twice before you do something. You don't have to talk about everything. And when the opportunity arises to splurge a little bit, just don't splurge to zero, and it's not necessarily spending. You mentioned investment. There can be a time where, you put some chips in the middle of the table and go for it, because it's a good opportunity. You feel confident about it and so forth. So having a little bit of everything and teaching your kids a little bit of everything, I think is, it's a nuance, but I think, if I could do it over again, that's how I do it.
How about you, Randy? What?
Well, I think it depends on the person, right? And I think for everybody, we got to ask, what are their goals? Yes. What do they want? Yep. And the right answer for the three of us is probably going to be different, let alone, everybody listening. My thought, I like Anthony's recipe thing that he mentioned. I think most people do need a framework and some kind of a plan, right? And a common thing is you take 10% and invest it, or in a past life I heard somebody refer to it as you pay yourself first.
Yeah.
Right?
Done.
If we go back to whatever episode Jim Lynch was on, he was real adamant about this, that you tithe 10%, you save 10 or 20%. And for some people, by the way, it might be, I've talked to people that make good money and they want to retire by the time they're 40. And they're like, I'm saving 50% so that I don't have to work for a long time and I can move to the mountains and live in the mountains of Colorado. And they're willing to sacrifice. And that's okay if that's what they want. I think a lot of the younger generation, it's more immediate experiences, it's travel, and they're spending now. And I think a lot of them are not, well, there's older generations too, but I think it's more common in millennials especially are spending money when they're younger and not saving. So I think depending on the person and what their goals and their desires are, it's some combination, whether it's tithing, saving, traveling today, if they want to buy a house, and it's figuring out it, but having a plan to know what that ratio is. And I certainly, like I said, erred too much on the saving and future part, I think in earlier parts of life, and not enough, but to each their own. So I like Anthony's recipe, and I'm not even sure that's what he meant, but that's what I took it for.
Yeah, I think I'm a fan of people being deliberate in whatever way is good for their goals. I think I'm pretty well aligned with like everyone's goals and then being deliberate towards those goals, as long as they don't take advantage of the system or the community. I think that's the part where I would have some kind of allergic reaction, is like if I go spend all my money on fun stuff, but I'm, bilking the system, whether the system is my family or my community or whatever, like that's where I think I would have a little bit of like, doesn't feel that great. I had to go learn this stuff on my own. So the places that I really dove in to learn this was like I read Kiyosaki's books, Cash Flow Quadrant and Rich Dad, Poor Dad. But the stuff I really enjoyed was like Thomas Stanley's books on how people built their own wealth. And then that kind of framed me into the same kind of recipe. And then I went to therapy years later and people were like, that's a preference. And that's where I think I became the most healthy, is recognizing, oh, okay. So like what I learned was right for me. And that's my set of preferences. And if somebody else has a different set of preferences, like that's okay. I think Alan Graham who's a local expert on homelessness said, there are some people that choose to be homeless living on the street, and that's their choice. And that might be hard to understand for some people, but if I can radically accept people for what they want and understand that money is just a tool, amoral and inanimate, and I don't fall in love with the idea of money, I think that generally is the most healthy from my perspective.
Yeah, I never had, I joke that when I played poker, that was my backpacking Europe phase, but I was making good money. It really wasn't, right? And if I'm living at Caesar's Palace, and having a maid, that's not really my backpacking Europe phase. I think of that more as people living in a hostel and whatever. But if somebody wants to do that,
hostel.
I'm a little envious of people that did that, right? Like there's a part of me that wishes I would have just taken, even if it was 6 months or a year, and just went and did something like that I do think can be very fulfilling and really add to somebody's life long term.
I just met a couple. I was traveling with my family overseas, and I met a young couple with my wife and my youngest son, and we were taking a sushi making class. And they were on the last couple weeks of a 5-month vacation. And I had so many questions about like what their vocation was that allowed them both to take a synchronized 5-month vacation. And they weren't immediately after college. They were clearly had some professional experience, and they were in a pretty nice part of town, and it was really, I think that's far more common in other countries than it is in the US. And like you, I had a little bit of like, jealousy around like, wow, I wish I had maybe thought a little bit differently about that experience. And
but you
5-month vacation.
But you could do that now.
I could, but I wouldn't, because of the other goals that I have, right? Like that's, and I recognize
and that's
the choices
okay.
I'm making. Yeah. But I might later.
Yeah.
A thought just came across this old man's head that, and it may have been the same for you, but I used to look up to people who were wealthy, that had made it, that became, successful politicians or businessmen in the community and had the nice house and so forth. And as I think about the behavior in the society today, particularly about people like that, a certain political people in the news, if you will, or vocal people, they show disdain for people that have become wealthy and successful, and the top 1% are these evil human beings. And I wonder what the impact of that's going to be long term on, the Generation X, the millennials, Z, and so on and so forth. That as that mindset is imprinted on them, that it's almost as if they're saying, no, the top 1%, the top 5%, you don't deserve that. You have to give that to us. To your point about taking advantage of the community, and it just struck me here as we were talking, and I just really, I guess now I'm worried about what that impact is going to be.
Yeah, Ray Dalio wrote a book about that recently. That was I didn't read the book. I read his article in Time magazine. That was June of 2024. Ray Dalio wrote a really cool article about how we cycle through that as a society, and the answer is it's not good.
Aligns with the fourth turning that we've talked about a couple times. Yeah. But like I could rant about this like long time. So
can you give us a short rant real quick? I mean, it's relevant.
The answer to your question, Anthony, is it's not healthy. Right. If we look at the core values that this country and beliefs this country was built upon, right? It's a land of opportunity. It's a land for people to go kick ass. And if you go back to when this country was really flourishing and everybody was getting richer, not just the rich, but everybody was getting richer. The Industrial Revolution in the U.S. did more to create wealth for everybody, not just, there's super, super rich people, the Rockefellers, the Carnegies, the Vanderbilts, et cetera, came out of that. But at no other time in world history has been better for poor people. And the number of people that came out of poverty into the middle class, that really is the origination worldwide of the middle class and where it originated. And everybody was benefiting. And the fact is, for most of our history, the people that created these opportunities were looked at as heroes because they did supply jobs, they did make the world better. If somebody created, Alexander Graham Bell creates the telephone, that improved people's lives. And I think what's changed is instead of embracing and putting our arms around progress and making the world better for other people and saying, good for that person to get rich, right? And other people have made the world better and not done it. But that attitude, in a lot of ways, that is America. That is why people from all over the world want to come here for that opportunity, for that American exceptionalism. And we're shitting on it now in a lot of ways. Not everybody, but there's a lot of people that are making people feel guilty. And I got to believe that we are going to miss out on some amazing inventions, some amazing entrepreneurs, and people similar to my thoughts about scarcity growing up, right? I had an attitude about rich people, that they were bad people. Yet I look at the people that you can't give away $1 billion if you don't make $1 billion. Right. And even as much as people call them the robber barons and everything else, Carnegie and Rockefeller, they had a competition for who could do the most good and who could give the most away. And people can agree, disagree, whatever they want, but the fact is, at the end of their life, they both did all of this good. And that is not healthy. And a lot of it is going back to the schools. The schools are doing a disservice. People do not understand money and economics. And part of the problem is it bores the shit out of most people. They hear it, they tune out, they're busy with their kids, they're busy with their family, they have their job, their father's sick, they're whatever. All this stuff's going on, and they're like, I don't have time for this. Yet we spend so much of our lives focused on money, even people that don't think they are. The house you live in or the apartment you rent or whatever it is.
8 hours a day you spend at work trying to earn it.
Or more.
Yeah. Right?
People move. Like I moved to Austin, Texas for a job to make more money and for more opportunity. You talked about, Anthony, moving around the world. John, we have all moved multiple times for money. It impacts us. We make decisions what we're going to do. It's what kind of car we drive. It's what kind of trips we take. It's what kind of the quality of the food that we eat and how healthy we are. A lot of it comes down to money. People that are born and grow up in an inner city that is full of junk food, seed oils, sugars, don't have healthy food, are born at a huge disadvantage because of money. And yet most people have spent almost no time understanding money and figuring it out. And I think in today's world, people understand there's something wrong. Like money printing it's pure evil. I mean, I won't go too far on my high horse here, but money printing is pure evil. Is one of the worst things in the world. If you told people that you were going to cut their wages by 7% a year, there'd be riots in the streets, right? Like every year we're going to cut your wages by 7%. But when the government, which that's what they average, is increasing the money supply by about 7%, that's exactly what they're doing. They're cutting everybody's wages by 7% a year. And that's why companies have to grow, is just, you can't stay flat because you can't keep up with money printing. So I could talk about this all day. I'll stop it there. But that lack of education, I think it's worth people spending a little time to understand money, the impact it has on their lives, and think about it, that if you're willing to move across the country for it, you might want to spend some basic time understanding it.
Well, and how it impacts your identity matters too, right? Like I think a healthy version of this would be, from my viewpoint, making sure that your identity is not tied up in money, not tied up in your role with money. And so if you that to me, because then you're disconnected and you can be objective about money as a tool. And so, but the society knows that identity politics and emotional selling, and so it's going to constantly keep pushing us back there. So you have to have an active effort to kind of say, hey, my money is not who I am, and vice versa. And I think one of the things I see in younger generations, my son's generation and daughter's generation too, is that they're a little less likely to have their identity tied up with money, which that part I'd actually do find to be a little more healthy. And then, in our house, we were able to talk about it a little more now, but it's not always comfortable.
Getting back to your point about losing out on inventions and so on, you could juxtapose, Henry Ford back in the early 1900s was a hero because he created a product for the common man, right? You could have any car you want as long as it was black. He was revered. He might have been a flawed man in other ways, but he was certainly revered, and he goes down in history. And today we have a person who's the richest man in the world who has, and I'll miss out on half of the things, he's kept Ukraine in a war with his Starlink. He basically launched the electric vehicle revolution. He's digging holes under Las Vegas with a machine and not disrupting traffic.
PayPal. Don't forget PayPal.
He was a founder of PayPal, along with a few other guys. He's putting chips in brains, and just today I saw he's convinced he can put a Neuralink in someone and repair, alleviate back pain. It's just an amazing thing. And he is reviled by, I think, a very small but loud group of people. I don't think the general populace does that, but it's the loudest among us that gets, the thing. And, what is that doing to other people? At some point, and I know this for a fact, he risked everything he had on that electric vehicle. Every single thing he had. If that had failed, he would have been the poorest man in the world, because he would have been absolutely broke. So, yeah, I think we need to be worried about that. Fortunately, I don't think it's everybody. And sometimes the loudmouth, you get tired of hearing them. And hopefully these upcoming generations will not be Bernie Sanders out of the.
Well, no situation or person is ever good or as bad as they seem. Right? It's especially when you're talking about the media's perception or the media's portrayal.
Yeah.
So I know we've got another episode coming up in a bit talking about kind of the way we use money. So I think this is a good conversation.
Yeah. Let's listeners, we're going to wrap this one up. The next episode will be sort of a somewhat part 2 to this, talking about how to use money for well. But as always, subscribe, listen, tell your friends, give us feedback. Go on social media. We'd love to hear. And by the way, if you have ideas for future episodes, things you would like to hear about, whether it's It's Twitter, it's Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn. Give us comments and let us know what you'd like to hear in the future. So thank you for listening. Until next time.
Thanks, Randy.